Chapter 23, Part 1, of Volume 3 of A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information, or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by MorganScorpion. Volume 3 of A Popular History of France from the Earliest Times, by Francois Guizot. Translated by Robert Black. Chapter 23, The 100 Years' War, Charles VI and the Dukes of Burgundy, Part 1. Sully, in his Memoir, characterizes the reign of Charles VI as "that reign so pregnant of sinister events, the grave of good laws and good morals in France." There is no exaggeration in these words. The 16th century, with its St. Bartholomew and the League, the 18th with its Reign of Terror, and the 19th with its Commune of Paris, contain scarcely any events so sinister as those of which France was, in the reign of Charles VI, from 1380 to 1422, the theatre and the victim. Scarcely was Charles V laid on his bier when it was seen what a loss he was and would be to his kingdom. Discord arose in the king's own family. In order to shorten the ever critical period of minority, Charles V had fixed the king's majority at the age of 14. His son Charles VI was not yet 12, and so had 2 years to remain under the guardianship of his 4 uncles, the Dukes of Anjou, Berry, Burgundy, and Bourbon. But the last being only a maternal uncle and a less puissant prince than his paternal uncles, it was between the other 3 that the strife began for temporary possession of the kingly power. Though very unequal in talent and in force of character, they were all 3 ambitious and jealous. The eldest, the Duke of Anjou, who was energetic, despotic, and stubborn, aspired to dominion in France for the sake of making French influence subserve the conquest of the kingdom of Naples, the object of his ambition. The Duke of Berry was a mediocre, restless, prodigal, and grasping prince. The Duke of Burgundy, Philippe the Bold, the most able and the most powerful of the 3, had been the favourite, first of his father, King John, and then of his brother, Charles V, who had confidence in him and readily adopted his counsels. His marriage in 1369 with the heiress to the Countship of Flanders had been vigorously opposed by the Count of Flanders, the young princess's father, and by the Flemish communes, ever more friendly to England than to France. But the old Countess of Flanders, Marguerite of France, vexed at the ill will of the Count her son, had one day said to him, as she tore open her dress before his eyes: "Since you will not yield to your mother's wishes, I will cut off these breasts which gave suck to you and to no other, and will throw them to the dogs to devour." This similar argument had moved the Count of Flanders. He had consented to the marriage, and the Duke of Burgundy's power had received such increment by it, that on the 4th of October, 1318, when Charles VI was crowned at Rheims, Philippe the Bold, without a word said previously to any, suddenly went up and sat himself down at the young king's side, above his eldest brother, the Duke of Anjou, thus assuming, without anybody's daring to oppose him, the rank and the rights of premier peer of France. He was not slow to demonstrate that his superiority in externals could not fail to establish his political preponderance. His father-in-law, Count Louis of Flanders, was in almost continual strife with the great Flemish communes, ever on the point of rising against the taxes he heaped upon them and the blows he struck at their privileges. The city of Ghent, in particular, joined complaint with menace. In 1381 the quarrel became war. The Ghentese at first experienced reverses. "Ah, if James van Artevelde were alive!" said they. James van Artevelde had left a son named Philip, and there was in Ghent a burgher captain, Peter Dubois, who went one evening to see Philip van Artevelde. "What we want now," said he, "is to choose a captain of great renown. Raise up again in this country that father of yours who in his lifetime was so loved and feared in Flanders." "Peter," replied Philip, "you make me a great offer. I promise that, if you put me in that place, I will do nought without your advice." "Ah, well," said Dubois, Can you really be haughty and cruel? The Flemings like to be treated so. With them you must make no more account of the life of men than you do of larks when the season for eating them comes." "I will do what shall be necessary," said Van Artevelde. The struggle grew violent between the count and the communes of Flanders, with Ghent at their head. After alternations of successes and reverses, the Ghentese were victorious, and Count Louis with difficulty escaped by hiding himself at Bruges in the house of a poor woman who took him up into a loft where her children slept, and where he lay flat between the paillasse and the feather bed. On leaving this asylum, he went to Bapaume to see his son-in-law, the Duke of Burgundy, and to ask his aid. "My lord," said the duke to him, "by the allegiance I owe to you and also to the king, you shall have satisfaction. It were to fail in one's duty to allow such a scum to govern a country. Unless order were restored, all knighthood and lordship might be destroyed in Christendom." The Duke of Burgundy went to Senlis, where Charles VI. Was, and asked for his support on behalf of the Count of Flanders. The question was referred to the king's council. The Duke of Berry hesitated, saying, "The best part of the prelates and nobles must be assembled and the whole matter set before them. We will see what is the general opinion." In the midst of this deliberation the young king came in with a hawk on his wrist. "Well, my dear uncles," said he, "of what are you parleying? Is it aught that I may know?" The Duke of Berry enlightened him, saying, "A brewer named Van Artevelde, who is English to the core, is besieging the remnant of the knights of Flanders shut up in Oudenarde, and they can get no aid but from you. What say you to it? Are you minded to help the Count of Flanders to reconquer his heritage, which those presumptuous villains have taken from him?" "By my faith," answered the king, "I am greatly minded. Go we hither. There is nothing I desire so much as to get on my harness, for I have never yet borne arms, and I would fain set out to-morrow." Amongst the prelates and lords summoned to Compiegne, some spoke of the difficulties and dangers that might be encountered. "Yes, yes," said the king, "but begin naught and win naught." When the Flemings heard of the king's decision, they sent respectful letters to him, begging him to be their mediator with the count their lord, but the letters were received with scoffs, and the messengers were kept in prison. At this news Van Artevelde said, "We must make alliance with the English. What meaneth this King Wren of France? Is it the Duke of Burgundy leading him by the nose, and he will not abide by his purpose? We will frighten France by showing her that we have the English for allies." But Van Artevelde was under delusion. Edward III. Was no longer King of England. The Flemings' demand was considered there to be arrogant and opposed to the interests of the lords in all countries, and the alliance was not concluded. Some attempts at negotiation took place between the advisers of Charles VI. And the Flemings, but without success. The Count of Flanders repaired to the king, who said, "Your quarrel is ours. Get you back to Artois. We shall soon be there, and within sight of our enemies." Accordingly, in November 1382, the King of France and his army marched into Flanders. Several towns, Cassel, Berge, Gravelines, and Turnhout, hastily submitted to him. There was less complete unanimity and greater alarm amongst the Flemings than their chiefs had anticipated. "Noble king," said the inhabitants, "we place our persons and our possessions at your discretion, and to show you that we recognize you as our lawful lord, here are the captains whom Van Artevelde gave us. Do with them according to your will, for it is they who have governed us." On the 28th of November the two armies found themselves close together at Rosebeke, between Ypres and Courtrai. In the evening Van Artevelde assembled his captains at supper, and, "Comrades," said he, "we shall to-morrow have rough work, for the King of France is here all agog for fighting. But have no fear, we are defending our good right and the liberties of Flanders. The English have not helped us; well, we shall only have the more honour. With the King of France is all the flower of his kingdom. Tell your men to slay all, and show no quarter. We must spare the King of France only; he is a child and must be pardoned. We will take him away to Ghent, and have him taught Flemish. As for the dukes, counts, barons, and other men at arms, slay them all. The commons of France shall not bear us ill will. I am quite sure that they would not have a single one of them back." At the very same moment King Charles VI. Was entertaining at supper the princes his uncles, the Count of Flanders, the Constable, Oliver de Clisson, the marshals, and company. They were arranging the order of battle for the morrow. Many folks blamed the Duke of Burgundy for having brought so young a king, the hope of the realm, into the perils of war. It was resolved to confide the care of him to the Constable de Clisson, whilst conferring upon Sire de Coucy, for that day only, the command of the army. "Most dear lord," said the Constable to the king, "I know that there is no greater honour than to have the care of your person, but it would be great grief to my comrades not to have me with them. I say not that they could not do without me, but for a fortnight now I have been getting everything ready for bringing most honour to you and yours. They would be much surprised if I should now withdraw." The king was somewhat embarrassed. "Constable," said he, "I would fain have you in my company to day. You know well that my lord my father loved you and trusted you more than any other. In the name of God and Saint Denis, do whatever you think best. You have a clearer insight into the matter than I and those who have advised me. Only attend my mass to-morrow." The battle began with spirit the next morning, in the midst of a thick fog. According to the monk of Saint Denis, Van Artevelde was not without disquietude. He had bidden one of his people go and observe the French army, and "You bring me bad news," said he, to the man in a whisper, "when you tell me there are so many French with the king. I was far from expecting it. This is a hard war; it requires discreet management. I think the best thing for me is to go and hurry up 10,000 of our comrades who are due." "Why leave thy host without a head?" said they who were about him. "It was to obey thy orders that we engaged in this enterprise. Thou must run the risk of battle with us." The French were more confident than Van Artevelde. "Sir," said the constable, addressing the king, cap in hand, "be of good cheer; these fellows are ours. Our very varlets might beat them." These words were far too presumptuous, for the Flemings fought with great bravery. Drawn up in a compact body, they drove back for a moment the French who were opposed to them, but Clisson had made everything ready for hemming them in. Attacked on all sides they tried, but in vain, to fly, a few with difficulty succeeding in escaping and casting, as they went, into the neighbouring swamps the banner of St. George. "It is not easy," says the monk of Saint Denis, "to set down with any certainty the number of the dead. Those who were present on this day, and I am disposed to follow their account, say that 25,000 Flemings fell on the battle, together with their leader Van Artevelde, the conductor of this rebellion, whose corpse, discovered with great trouble amongst a heap of slain, was, by order of Charles VI., hung upon a tree in the neighbourhood. The French also lost in this struggle some noble knights, not less illustrious by birth than valour, amongst others 44 valiant men who, being the first to hurl themselves upon the ranks of the enemy to break them, thus won for themselves great glory. The victory at Rosebeke was a great cause for satisfaction and pride to Charles VI. And his uncle, the Duke of Burgundy. They had conquered on the field in Flanders the commonalty of Paris as well as that of Ghent, and in France there was great need of such a success, for since the accession of the young king the Parisians had risen with a demand for actual abolition of the taxes which Charles V. on his deathbed had deplored the necessity, and all but decreed the cessation. The king's uncle, his guardians, had at first stopped and indeed suppressed the greater part of those taxes, but soon afterwards they had to face a pressing necessity. The war with England was going on, and the revenues of the royal domain were not sufficient for the maintenance of it. The Duke of Anjou attempted to renew the taxes, and one of Charles V.'s former councillors, John Desmarets, advocate general in Parliament, abetted him in his attempt. 7 times in the course of the year 1381, assemblies of notables met at Paris to consider the project, and on the 1st of March, 1382, an agent of the governing power scoured the city at full gallop, proclaiming the renewal of the principal tax. There was a fresh outbreak. The populace, armed with all sorts of weapons, with strong mallets amongst the rest, spread in all directions, killing the collectors, and storming and plundering the Hôtel de Ville. They were called the Malleteers. They were put down, but with as much timidity as cruelty. Some of them were arrested, and at night thrown into the Seine, sewn up in sacks, without other formality or trial. A fresh meeting of notables was convened, towards the middle of April, at Compiegne, and the deputies from the principal towns were summoned to it, but they durst not come to any decision. They were come, they said, only to hear and report. They would use their best endeavours to prevail on those by whom they had been sent to do the king's pleasure. Towards the end of April, some of them returned to Meaux, reporting that they had everywhere met with them the most lively resistance. They had everywhere heard shouted at them, "Sooner death than the tax." Only the deputies from Sens had voted a tax, which was to be levied on all merchandise. But when the question of collecting it arose, the people of Sens evinced such violent opposition that it had to be given up. It was when facts and feelings were in this condition in France that Charles VI. And the Duke of Burgundy had set out with their army to go and force the Flemish communes to submit to their count. Returning victorious from Flanders to France, Charles VI. And his uncles, everywhere brilliantly feasted on their march, went first of all for 9 days to Compiegne, to find recreation after their fatigues, says the monk of St. Denis, in the pleasures of the chase. Afterwards, on the 10th of January 1383, the king took back in state to the church of St. Denis the oriflamme which he had borne away on his expedition, and next day, the 11th of January, he re-entered Paris, he alone being mounted, in the midst of his army. The burgesses went out of the city to meet him, and offer him their wonted homage, but they were curtly ordered to retrace their steps. The king and his uncles, they were informed, could not forget offences so recent. The wooden barriers which had been placed before the gates of the city to prevent anybody from entering without permission, were cut down with battle axes. The very gates were torn from their hinges, they were thrown down upon the king's highway, and the procession went over them, as if to trample under foot the fierce pride of the Parisians. When he was once in the city, and was leaving Notre Dame, the king sent abroad throughout all the streets an order forbidding anyone, under the most severe penalties, from insulting or causing the least harm to the burgesses in any way whatsoever, and the constable had 2 plunderers strung up to the windows of the houses in which they had committed their thefts. But fundamental order having been thus upheld, reprisals began to be taken for the outbreaks of the Parisians. Municipal magistrates or populace, burgesses or artisans, rich or poor, in the course of the 2 preceding years, arrests, imprisonments, fines, confiscations, executions, severities of all kinds fell upon the most conspicuous and the most formidable of those who had headed or favoured popular movements. The most solemn and the most iniquitous of these punishments was that which befell the Advocate General, John Desmarets. For nearly a whole year, said the monk of St. Denis, he had served as mediator between the king and the Parisians. He had often restrained the fury and stopped the excesses of the populace, by preventing them from giving rein to their cruelty. He was always warning the factious that to provoke the wrath of the king and the princes was to expose themselves to almost certain death. But, yielding to the prayers of this rebellious and turbulent mob, he, instead of leaving Paris as the rest of his profession had done, had remained there, and throwing himself boldly amidst the storms of civil discord, he had advised the assumption of arms and the defence of the city, which he knew was very displeasing to the king and the grandees. When he was taken to the execution, he was put on a car higher than the rest, that he might be better seen by everybody. Nothing shook for a moment the firmness of this old man of 70 years. "Where are they who judged me?" he said. "Let them come and set forth the reasons for my death. Judge me, O God, and separate my cause from that of the evildoers." On his arrival at the market-place, some of the spectators called out to him, "Ask the king's mercy, Master John, that he may pardon your offences." He turned round, saying, "I served well and loyally his great-grandfather King Philippe, his grandfather King John, and his father King Charles. None of those kings ever had anything to reproach me with. And this one would not reproach me any the more, if he were of a grown man's age and experience. I don't suppose that he is a whit to blame for such a sentence, and I have no cause to cry him mercy. To God alone must I cry for mercy, and I pray to him to forgive my sins." Public respect accompanied the old and courageous magistrate beyond the scaffold. His corpse was taken up by his friends, and at a later period honourably buried in the church of St. Catherine. Chapter 24.